Manipulation rarely announces itself. It mentors your life disguised as affection, loyalty, and emotional safety. It does not control you with force. It reshapes your perception until you question your own instincts. And the most dangerous part is realizing the damage only after your confidence quietly begins disappearing. Before we uncover the 8 hidden ways manipulation shapes your mind, pause and ask yourself how safe you really feel. Love bombing. At the beginning, their attention feels intense, overwhelming, and almost too perfect to question. They text constantly, praise you excessively, and describe a future together unusually early. The emotional acceleration feels flattering, creating a sense of rare and immediate connection. Healthy attachment develops gradually, but manipulation intentionally speeds up emotional bonding. This sudden intensity floods your brain with validation and psychological reward signals. Dopamine and emotional excitement begin associating this person with safety and importance. You feel uniquely chosen, deeply understood, and emotionally prioritized above everyone else. Because the experience feels extraordinary, you lower boundaries faster than usual. Personal vulnerabilities are shared earlier than trust would normally justify. The attachment forms before genuine compatibility is realistically evaluated. Then the consistency begins subtly decreasing without any clear explanation. Affection becomes unpredictable, leaving you confused about what changed internally. You begin longing for the earlier version of them you first experienced. Your brain attempts to recreate the original emotional intensity repeatedly. The contrast between warmth and distance strengthens psychological dependency. This cycle is not romance, it is strategic conditioning of attachment responses. By the time you notice inconsistency, emotional investment is already deeply rooted. You defend the connection because losing it feels like losing significance. What felt like extraordinary love was carefully structured emotional acceleration, and dependency now replaces the stability that healthy intimacy requires. Gaslighting. Gaslighting rarely begins with dramatic denial or obvious distortion of events. It starts with subtle corrections that appear harmless or easily dismissible. They question small details of conversations you clearly remember accurately. Statements like, "that never happened," are delivered with calm certainty. At first, you confidently defend your memory and perception. Repeated contradiction gradually weakens your trust in personal recollection. You begin replaying events privately to confirm your own accuracy. Self-doubt slowly replaces clarity even when evidence supports you. The manipulator maintains composure, reinforcing the illusion of rational stability. Because humans seek social validation, disagreement destabilizes internal confidence significantly. You start prefacing statements with uncertainty before expressing simple observations. Apologies increase despite unclear wrongdoing or confirmed factual correctness. Your emotional reactions are labeled exaggerated or overly sensitive repeatedly. Eventually, you question your emotional responses before evaluating their behavior. Cognitive dissonance grows as your experience conflicts with their narrative. To reduce discomfort, your brain considers accepting their version instead. Reliance on their interpretation becomes psychologically easier than internal conflict. Gradually, they become the authority over what is considered real. When perception shifts, autonomy quietly begins dissolving beneath confusion. Control is achieved not through force, but through engineered uncertainty. Silent treatment. Conflict does not result in discussion, resolution, or mutual understanding afterward. Instead, communication abruptly stops without explanation or emotional closure. Messages go unanswered while emotional distance becomes noticeably deliberate. The absence of response creates immediate psychological discomfort and anxiety. Humans are neurologically wired to interpret sudden disconnection as threat. Your nervous system shifts into heightened alert seeking relational safety. Thoughts begin scanning for possible mistakes you may have committed. You mentally review events searching for minor perceived offenses. Silence feels like punishment rather than space for reflection. Because there is no dialogue, imagination fills the informational void quickly. You experience tension that mirrors physical pain associated with rejection. To restore connection, you consider apologizing regardless of actual responsibility. Behavior becomes increasingly cautious to prevent future withdrawal episodes. The manipulator regains emotional leverage without verbal confrontation or aggression. Accountability is avoided while anxiety does the controlling work internally. Silence becomes a conditioning tool shaping your future compliance patterns. You prioritize avoiding abandonment over expressing legitimate concerns. Gradually, emotional expression feels risky and potentially relationship-threatening. Power shifts towards whoever controls access to communication consistently. What appears passive is actually a calculated strategy of emotional regulation. Playing the victim. Whenever concerns are raised, the focus quickly shifts toward their suffering. Your emotional pain becomes secondary to their narrative of hardship. Simple accountability transforms into accusations of unfair treatment toward them. They describe themselves as misunderstood, overwhelmed, or constantly attacked. You begin comforting them despite originally seeking clarity for yourself. Responsibility subtly transfers from their behavior to your reaction. This reversal creates confusion about who was initially harmed. Empathy becomes exploited as a mechanism for avoiding consequences. You hesitate to raise issues, fearing emotional breakdown responses. Guilt develops around expressing normal relational expectations or boundaries. Their fragility appears authentic, increasing your reluctance to challenge inconsistencies. Discussions end with you apologizing for causing emotional distress. Your needs gradually feel excessive compared to their portrayed struggles. Conflict resolution becomes emotional caretaking instead of mutual accountability. Over time, you suppress dissatisfaction to preserve perceived stability. The relationship dynamic centers around protecting their emotional comfort. Your internal discomfort is minimized to maintain external harmony. Victim positioning shields them from examining their own conduct honestly. You adapt behavior to avoid triggering their defensive vulnerability narratives. Manipulation succeeds when empathy overrides objective evaluation of actions. Emotional blackmail. Requests are framed in ways that connect love with compliance directly. Statements imply that refusal would indicate emotional betrayal or indifference. Affection becomes conditional upon meeting their unspoken expectations consistently. Phrases emphasize sacrifice they claim to have made for you. Gratitude is leveraged as justification for disproportionate obligations. You feel indebted rather than freely choosing participation. Fear of disappointing them influences otherwise independent decisions. Boundaries begin feeling selfish instead of protective and reasonable. Emotional tension increases whenever you consider saying no. Their disappointment appears exaggerated to intensify internal pressure. You weigh consequences of refusal more than personal comfort. Autonomy weakens under perceived threat of relational withdrawal. Love is subtly redefined as proof through sacrifice. Compliance temporarily restores warmth, reinforcing behavioral submission patterns. The relief after agreeing reinforces future agreement automatically. Gradually, you associate harmony with personal self-neglect. Internal conflict arises between authenticity and relational preservation. Decision-making shifts from desire toward avoidance of guilt. Your emotional freedom narrows without overt force applied. Control operates through obligation disguised as devotion and loyalty. Isolation. Concerns about your friends are expressed as protective observations initially. They question whether others truly support your growth and happiness. Time spent outside the relationship becomes subtly criticized or discouraged. Gradually, invitations are declined to avoid unnecessary relational tension. Social circles shrink without deliberate, conscious decision-making. You share less about relationship struggles with trusted confidants. External perspectives that might challenge manipulation decrease significantly.
Emotional reliance on the relationship intensifies as alternatives diminish. Loneliness outside the partnership increases perceived attachment value. The manipulator becomes primary source of validation and reassurance. Without contrast, unhealthy patterns appear increasingly normalized internally. Independence feels risky because support systems feel distant. You hesitate contacting others, fearing judgment or misunderstanding. Self-silencing replaces open communication with external networks. Dependence strengthens because emotional survival feels centralized. Isolation does not require physical confinement to be effective. Psychological narrowing of social input achieves similar outcomes. The fewer voices you hear, the louder theirs becomes. Decision-making reflects limited informational diversity and feedback. Control deepens when perspective becomes singular and unchallenged. Inconsistent reward. Affection fluctuates unpredictably without clear behavioral correlation. Warmth one day is replaced by emotional distance the next. You search for patterns explaining sudden changes in demeanor. Because humans crave predictability, inconsistency heightens attention sharply. The brain releases stronger reinforcement under irregular reward schedules. Uncertainty increases motivation to restore previous positive experiences. You analyze conversations, attempting to identify hidden mistakes. Effort intensifies despite unclear cause for relational shifts. Moments of affection feel more valuable after deprivation periods. Contrast amplifies emotional impact beyond normal relational standards. You interpret occasional warmth as proof of underlying commitment. Hope strengthens despite repeated emotional instability cycles. Self-blame develops as explanation for unpredictable treatment. Energy focuses on regaining approval rather than evaluating compatibility. This pattern mirrors behavioral conditioning observed in reinforcement psychology research. Intermittent reward structures create persistent attachment despite dissatisfaction. You invest more effort precisely when stability decreases. Rational evaluation weakens under influence of emotional variability. The relationship feels addictive rather than securely connected. Unpredictability becomes the engine sustaining prolonged attachment. Gradual boundary erosion. Manipulation often advances through increments too small to notice. Minor dismissals are tolerated to avoid appearing overly reactive. Small compromises seem harmless within broader relational context. Each concession slightly adjusts your internal standard of respect. Because change is gradual, comparison to previous expectations fades. Discomfort becomes normalized through repeated exposure and rationalization. You justify behaviors that once clearly violated personal principles. The threshold for unacceptable conduct steadily increases over time. Boundary violations shift from surprising to reluctantly expected. You adapt responses to minimize perceived relational disruption. Self-advocacy decreases as accommodation becomes habitual strategy. Standards that once defined you quietly lose clarity. The manipulator benefits from your increasing tolerance levels. Escalation feels incremental rather than dramatically transformative. Looking back, the shift appears far more obvious retrospectively. However, within the process, each step seemed individually insignificant. Your identity subtly reorganizes around maintaining connection stability. Resistance feels disproportionate compared to single isolated incidents. Cumulative erosion weakens psychological resilience and self-definition. Control is finalized when boundaries exist only in memory.
If you enjoyed this video, please like my channel, Mr. Shawnee Psych, and share your thoughts in the comments about what you liked. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. I'll do my best to reply as quickly as I can.